right. Matt's finishing up this week.
Peter Gabriel. Yep. So we are covering Peter Gabriel-So from 1986. In the opening montage, you heard a clip from Sledgehammer, and now you're going to hear a clip from Red Rain. So Peter Gabriel-So comes in at number 30 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 4 in 1986, number 246 of all time. It is Peter Gabriel's highest-rated album on Best Ever Albums. Well, we covered a second highest-rated record in a cold list, and that was Peter Gabriel 3, also known as Melt. So you can go to that. This is So was ranked at number 297 in Rolling Stone's list, and Peter Gabriel is ranked as the number 128th highest rated artist in Best Ever Albums. So yeah, this is his fifth studio album that was recorded from February through December of 1985. So just about a year, released on May 19th, 1986, included 5 singles. You might have heard of some of them, if not all of them. 5 of them, yep. Sledgehammer, In Your Eyes, Don't Give Up, Big Time, and Red Rain were all singles. And so a little history of Peter Gabriel. He was born Peter Brian Gabriel on February 13th, 1950. And he attended private and preparatory schools as a child, taking piano lessons from his mother. And he also developed an interest in drumming, which I didn't know this about him, but that was basically the first real instrument that his first love. And even throughout his career, drums were kind of an essential part of his songwriting and his style. He always kind of, like John, he always kind of went to the drums first. Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to be the drummer in Genesis, though.
I guess he wasn't good. He was too busy with costumes and whatever. So he wrote his first song at the age of 12 called Sammy the Slug. And in 1963, he enrolled at a Charterhouse public school and became a drummer and vocalist of his first band called the Milords, which was around for a little bit. And in 65, he formed another band.
How are you, my lord? Is that
exactly.
kind of like what? Yeah, okay.
Yep. I mean, it was spelled Milords, but it was pronounced Milords, like the old-fashioned way. In 65, he formed another band called Garden Wall, and that was formed with one of his friends, Tony Banks, who would later go on to form Genesis with, and another guy by the name of Chris Stewart. They were around for a couple years, but they disbanded in 67. But they were all invited to play with fellow pupils Anthony Phillips and Mike Rutherford, and this is really the beginning, the genesis of Genesis. There you go. And if you want more of a bio of the beginning of Genesis, you can go to several our bios, CTS Season 2, Episode 15, 18, and 20, where we covered Foxtrot, Selling England by the Pound, and The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. So that takes us through 1975, when Peter Gabriel quit Genesis. There was, if you recall, he had a family at the time, so that was part of it. He was kind of devoting some time to his wife and his child. And there was also some frustration with his costumes and his theatrical antics, and the band was more interested in the musical component, and he figured, you know what, it's probably better if we just separate. So he goes on and he starts putting out some other records.
Conscious uncoupling, is that what that's called?
Conscious uncoupling, sure.
It's weird he didn't continue with the costume stuff, if that's what he's into.
And I mean, we could talk about this a little bit, but I am a little fascinated by the transformation of Gabriel from what he was doing in Genesis to what he did in his solo career. Because it seems like it's totally different people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he starts off by releasing his first 4 albums are all titled Peter Gabriel. So they're also known as Peter Gabriel 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then each of them also have a word associated with them based on what the album cover is. So the first album, since there's a car on the cover, that one is referred to as Car. That is from 1977. Did pretty well, so reached number 7 in the UK and 38 in the US, and that includes the hit you might have heard, Salisbury Hill. And the tour behind that record actually included King Crimson's Robert Fripp on guitar, so he's making another appearance. That guy's kind of all over the place. He just seems to kind of come in and out of
popping
all,
up.
He is a CTS Hall of Famer.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think so.
Yep.
And I think he still does like stuff. Every now and then I'll see him pop up on like, he'll do like he'll cover a song like on YouTube, and he'll post it on YouTube, and it's him and his wife, and they're just they look they got like this weird makeup, and they have like their own interpretations of popular songs. So he's got a pretty active YouTube channel, I believe. So Peter Gabriel 2, also known as Scratch, because he's scratching on the album cover, scratch marks, was released in 78, also did pretty well, reached number 10 in the UK and 45 in the US. And then Peter Gabriel 3, which was Melt, which is the album that we covered, that was released in 1980. And it's around this time where and that's kind of a little bit more, but he goes a little bit more experimental there, branching out. And around this time, he starts to develop an interest in African music and drum machines. And Phil Collins contributed to that record, playing drums, and this is credited as being the first album to use something called gated reverb, which is just a fancy way of saying that production style, that drumming that you get in a song like "In the Air Tonight" that John loves so much.
I love that song.
John, yeah,
my favorite Sonic sounds.
I think John particularly does not care for that sound.
Yes.
So you can thank Peter Gabriel for that, John, because it was really his kind of directing of Phil Collins and the production that was happening in that studio that used that tool to kind of get that echoey, like very big drum sound that was prominent in many 80s albums and songs. So
I'll give him a pass because he himself does not overuse it, but it's not his greatest accomplishment to music, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and other people definitely did that.
We covered Peter Gabriel 3 on bonus episode 2 of this season.
Oh, okay, there you go. Thank you, Josh. So Gabriel's for that record, the U.S. distributor, which was Atlantic Records, refused to put the album out, thinking that it was too esoteric. And then after that, he signed a recording contract with Mercury Records and released the album, which went to number 1 in the UK and 22 in the US, so still doing pretty well. Peter Gabriel 4, which is also known as Security. I don't know why. The other 3 titles make sense. The Security one seems weird. It's like this weird draw. Maybe it's supposed to be security guard. I don't know that on the cover, but so Gabriel he starts to take a larger production role. With that record, he incorporated a digital sampling synthesizer and electronic instrumentation with sampling world beat percussion, and he was able to create the rhythms and the grooves that he really wanted. So he's starting to kind of, rather than telling a drummer what he wanted and having the drummer play it, he just said, I'm going to start just using all these tools and toys that I have in the studio and create my own drumming.
It's very similar.
Band.
It's very similar to an artist who appears on this album as well. Did the same thing, if you remember. So,
is that a
Copeland?
preview?
I'll bring it up when we talk.
Okay,
about it.
I'm trying to think of who the other artists that played on this. So, all right, so that album, Security, was released in 1982. Included "Shock the Monkey," which was Gabriel's first song to hit the top 40 in the U.S., reaching number 29. And after
also,
that,
one of my dad's 10 favorite songs ever, "Shock the Monkey."
"Shock the Monkey."
He loves that
Dun,
song.
dun, dun, dun. In 1983, he wrote the soundtrack to the film Birdie. I don't know, Josh, have you ever seen Birdie?
The Clint Eastwood movie?
No, Nick Cage and Matthew Modine.
Oh, no. Oh, that's Bird I'm thinking of. Bird.
Yeah. This is Birdie. And that's where he teamed up with a producer named Daniel Lanois. And they developed, basically Gabriel just had a bunch of stuff, different things that he was working on, and gave it to Lanois and said, do whatever you can with some of this stuff. And so they worked well together, and so Gabriel brings him over to work on this next album. So Lanois is the producer behind that. And so they wanted this to be a little bit of a less experimental record, even though there are some experimental aspects of it. He wanted to kind of do a little bit more straightforward hits. So that was intentional. There were some big hits on this record, and that was definitely intentional. He drew on various musical influences, which included pop and soul. as well as art rock, and he starts to incorporate more world music, particularly stuff coming from African and Brazilian styles of music. And the label starts to get frustrated with his lack of album titles. So they're like, stop calling your album Peter Gabriel and get something. And so Gabriel had very little, he didn't really care about the album title. He was much more interested in what the cover art was, or what was happening on the cover. So he just picked something as benign as a two-letter word. So he just went with "so," and then he said, well, what you can do if you only have 2 letters, you can make them really big on the album, and they can become part of the artwork. And so he's like, that's a style that I've really liked. And so he continued to do that with future records. I think the one after this was "Us," and then later on there was "Up." So he's a fan of the 2-letter album title.
Oh, Birdie's on my watch list, Matt. So clearly,
is it? Well, there you go.
I will watch
music
it at some point.
Music by Peter Gabriel and Daniel.
Did he eventually do like WTF, like to get into the current day?
Yeah.
Dafa.
So the rehearsals for "So" started off just with Gabriel, Lanois, and guitarist David Rhodes, but it soon grew, and he started gathering other musicians, including Stuart Copeland. And they started with some very basic chord structures led by Gabriel, which were developed into improvised compositions. A lot of the recording was done in they basically rented out this farm in the middle of nowhere. So they kind of turned this farmhouse into a studio. He was Gabriel was very much into playing around with the studio, the different elements within the studio as well. So he was very much into the music, but was procrastinating on the lyrics. So much to the point where Lanois at one point nailed him in a room, nailed the door shut so he could see. He's like, get in there and write some lyrics. So he locked him in that room. Peter Gabriel would also I guess there was a phone on site that he would go to when he was trying to procrastinate and just go call people and talk to them. So Lanois just at one point threw the phone against the dash and just was just busted it all over the place and was trying to get him to focus on doing the record. So a couple of interesting things of note here. When they did Big Time, you might hear that big bass sound. And the way that they got that, there was a drummer by the name of Jerry Marotta that would hit the strings of the bass that Tony Levin was playing. So Levin would kind of finger the chords and the notes, and then the drummer would come up and hit the bass with the drumsticks to kind of get that full that bass sound. And that led Levin to invent something called funk fingers, which are basically just some drumsticks that are taped or tied to the end of your fingers, and you can use your fingers to slap the bass and get that bass sound that you're going for. So
slapping the bass, man.
Slapping the bass. I thought this was really interesting. So In Your Eyes, if you guys listen to this on Spotify or Amazon or whatever, most likely In Your Eyes was the final track, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's what he originally wanted, but when they released this on LP, they changed the track listing around to put In Your Eyes as the first track of the second side of the record. And the reason for that is Gabriel wanted to have a really big full bass sound, which requires larger grooves on the record. And he was like, well, if you put that song at the end where the record becomes smaller, you can't get the grooves that you really need to get that sound, because there's not enough space for it on that part of the record. So he put it up towards the front, which I thought I've never thought about that before. That you're going to get with a record, you're more likely to get a larger bass, a fuller bass sound, if it's at the beginning of a side of a record rather than at the end, just by the nature of how you do the grooves. So I thought that was interesting.
Because the first song's on the outside, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it.
Yep,
okay.
It goes on to the end. So, so the CD allowed, even though records technically sound better, the CD was allowed Gabriel to have this done the way that he wanted to.
Yeah.
So let's see. The Don't Give Up song was inspired by the Depression era photographs of Dorothea Lange, showing poverty-stricken Americans during the Dust Bowl. And Don't Give Up, you guys know who's singing the female part on that song, correct?
Yeah.
Is it Kate Bush?
That's Kate Bush.
It is Kate Bush. Do you know who?
That's who I was referencing, by the way, as
okay.
the person
Yes.
who basically said, "I'm no longer going to have a band. I'm just going to do my own shit with the
Correct.
synthesizer."
Yes.
Yeah.
I found it interesting. Do you know who Peter Gabriel originally wanted to sing the female part of that song? who he had in mind when he wrote the song.
Dolly
Parton.
Dolly
Parton. He thought he was thinking of a country kind of like vibe in his head. And I guess when they asked Dolly Parton to do it, she said no, at least in part because she and the people that she was working with had no idea who Peter Gabriel was. So she turned that down, and now you've got Kate Bush singing it. So also in a 2014 interview, Elton John attributed his sobriety to that song.
They're kind of simpatico, I think, Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel, from an artistic perspective.
Yeah. Excellent Birds. That's the
This is the picture.
What is it? This is the picture. Excellent Birds. That is co-written with another CTS person, Laurie Anderson, and she appears on that song. And I read about that after like listening to it a couple times, and as soon as I read that, I was like, of course, it sounds exactly like the Laurie Anderson, like a Laurie Anderson type song. So she's on here as well. Another kind of CTS reference here, the album's cover is a portrait of Peter Gabriel photographed by Trevor Key, who was then most famous for capturing the bell artwork for Mike Oldfeld's Tubular Bells, which we didn't cover, but we've talked about several times.
About it, yeah.
So
listen to it.
Mike Oldfield, yep.
Yep.
Exorcist music.
And so I also like this. The sleeve of the record was designed by Peter Seville, who was best known for designing sleeves for several Factory Records artists, including New Order and, New Order's Low Life. So the sleeve that they used for this record was similar to that they used for New Order's Low Life, which is another album that we have covered. And this album was pretty big, guys. This sold millions of copies. It topped the charts of 7 countries worldwide, including the UK. It really puts Gabriel on the map for being certainly a well-known artist, particularly because of the video of Sledgehammer, which we watched a couple weeks ago for Josh's for the videos that the video segment. I learned that was that video won the record, has the record for the most Video Music Awards at 9. And it's also considered the most played video of all time on MTV. No other video has been played more than Sledgehammer.
Wow.
That was his number one single for him as well. It was knocked off of the number one charts in 1986 by it displaced, the song that it displaced when it hit number one was Genesis Invisible Touch. And for both of those artists, both of those songs represent the only times they ever hit number one on the U.S. charts. It's nominated for a Grammy for Album of the Year, but it lost out to Graceland, which we covered last week. I think it was last week. And it's been praised for its accessibility and its experimentation, kind of blending both the pop, nature as well as being somewhat experimental. And it brought him to the mainstream and solidified him as a huge artist. So there we go, Peter Gabriel-So. And I think, is it Josh?
Yeah.
I think you're going first here, Josh. What'd you think?
Well, we saw him perform this album, right?
We did. You're right.
In Fairfax, right?
It was at George Mason, and I think my brother had tickets and they couldn't go because he's got like 20 kids. Yeah. So he was just like, "Do you want to use these?" I was like, "Yeah." And they played. Do you remember the gimmick of that show?
Yeah, they played it in reverse, right?
Yeah, they played it backwards. Yeah. They played the entire album from back to front. Yep, you're right.
Right. Yeah, so I don't remember anything about that concert, just that we went. I don't remember being like, blown away or remembering. I remember we were kind of like high up, but
yeah, they were great seats.
High up, huh?
Yeah, but on this listen, I really like this album. I mean, I can see the appeal of it. I really like all of the songs are really strong in my opinion, and it flows really well. It's funny that you said about him not wanting to write the lyrics, because I kind of see that. I feel like the lyrics are pretty repetitive and just kind of him repeating the refrain a lot. I don't, so I don't think the lyrics are kind of the strongest part for me on this album, and I also kind of went in expecting more, we had talked about him being influenced by kind of the world music vibe, and there's not really that on here. If it is, it's like kind of really subtle. I didn't pick up on it. It wasn't, I was thinking, we had just talked about Graceland and how that was so influenced by that. I was thinking it might be like that, but it really wasn't, in my opinion. We just listened to Sledgehammer and watched the video, and I listened to it again both times. So I listened to this album. I think that's a testament to how great that song is, that I did not get sick of it even like a couple weeks after watching the video multiple times. The all of the singles are really good. I really liked Mercy Street. I thought that could be another single as well. It's kind of got the slow build, and I like the kind of, I don't know, it's like a keyboard or like a tinkling of keys or chimes or something in it that I really liked. He's got a really great voice and kind of like soulful delivery on songs like Don't Give Up and Red Rain. It's kind of got this melancholy feel to it on a lot of the songs, or sadness or something reflective nature to it that I really dig. And yeah, it's for a song, you know, I think Sledgehammer is kind of like the most upbeat song on this album. It's kind of a slower overall tempo to it, and but that didn't detract for me. I really liked all of Don't Give Up, that voice again, Mercy Street, Big Time. I would say kind of this is the picture, or We Do What We're Told, were kind of the songs that were the weaker tracks for me. But even so, there's only 9 songs, and I think somebody could respond to those just as well as the ones I responded to. So I really like his experimentation on this album. I think he just kind of makes unique pop songs, and Sledgehammer is the perfect example of that, and that carries through on the album. I don't have a specific like musical instrumentation that I picked up on, but there's just a lot of, I think the drumming is something that I noticed, and kind of his incorporation of percussion and it works and is interesting on this. And yeah, I'm a fan of this album, and I can see why it sold a ton and why it was his kind of breakthrough. So thumbs up for me on this.
All right,
John, are you there?
Sorry, guys. There was some sort of delay there on mine. I could hear you guys, but it's there. So I'm here. Don't worry about it. It's so this album. So I think the first thing that amazed me was how many of Peter Gabriel's big hits were on this album. I think I thought of him more like his former bandmate Phil Collins, or like a Billy Joel or an Elton John, where like each album had a certain amount of the hits, right? Yeah. And like they were spread more, but no, like basically from the second this album started, it was like, whoa, that's a lot of the Peter Gabriel songs that I consider to be like the inner sanctum of Peter Gabriel songs. So I think that was the first thing that surprised me a little bit. The other thing that jumped out to me about this album is how interesting it is that we listened to this the week after we listened to Graceland. Because if you're going to crib African and Brazilian sounds, like I would like to point to In Your Eyes as the way of how to do that in a way that is not like as crass, I feel, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And even a song like Red Rain, you know, like it takes elements where you could tell Peter Gabriel has been both listening to and inspired by this, but it is definitively still Peter Gabriel. And it does not feel as if he is taking this music and elevating himself, like, you know, as the purveyor of it. Yeah. It is more he's weaving it in like an artist would from an influence. And so from that end of things, I really gained an appreciation for Peter Gabriel's use of it in this, and I think it really stood out to me even more because of the fact that it just seemed it was so easily in contrast, right, to the other album, and like my appreciation
more seamless, I would say.
I would say so too, yeah. And I really love the song Red Rain. I really love the song Don't Give Up. I mean, who can't like In Your Eyes? I've never and I love Mercy Street is a great song. I've never been a fan at all of the song Big Time. It doesn't do much for me at all. And Sledgehammer I'm lukewarm on. But I think overall I went into this album expecting that I was going to be more neutral on this album. And I really like this album to the point where I would go and say that it's pretty much an essential piece of 80s pop music because of what he's drawing from and his creative angles. I really love the fact that Peter Gabriel approaches his albums like an artist and like a performance artist. which Matt touched in quite a bit. And because of that, he takes chances, and he takes very interesting chances. And when somebody takes interesting chances musically for me, I am very willing to forgive occasional tracks, right, that I don't love as much, because it falls in the category of that's just, you need some of that to get the flashes of brilliance. And the brilliance was here, right, in multiple areas. In Your Eyes and I think like Don't Give Up are the two that really stand out to me as things. I also have gained a little bit more of an appreciation for Sledgehammer as I listen to it as just a song divorced from the video. I think it's weird, but I think to some degree I never really processed the song as a song. I almost processed it like a video with a song attached to it.
Yeah.
And so now I never really thought of that until I listened to it a couple times this week, and I'm like, I think that might be the first time I listened to Sledgehammer outside of the context of watching the video with it. So that was interesting in its own way. But yeah, this one gets a thumbs up from me. And it's, both Peter Gabriel albums we've covered, I liked quite a bit. And I don't know for what reason I thought there was going to be more hindrances to me liking him, because in many ways he checks a lot of the boxes of a musician and style of musician that I historically like. But I won't say pleasant surprise, because I knew I was going to like tracks on this. But yeah, this one also inspired me to call my dad and go, you know what? I know you love Peter Gabriel, and I know I've always sort of said I'm in the middle on the fence on it, but I think I may be jumping on Team Gabriel here going forward, Dad. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think were you going to say something, Josh?
No.
Okay. I think it's interesting how is there another song that's that is more encapsulated by its video than Sledgehammer. I mean, you can't think of that song without thinking of the video.
Really close,
it's up there, like top 5 or whatever, So you're kind of right about that. But Peter Gabriel, I just find him fascinating. Kind of touching on it earlier, just about how just a different direction he goes after he does Genesis. And then like, I always kind of like as a kid, and Sherry said something about this earlier when we were listening to this record that kind of struck a chord with me. I think it was kind of true for me as well. Like, I think when he came out, like, I just remember him being kind of like this, he's kind of like this goofy middle-aged guy that does like quirky videos, that like, it wasn't like my thing. I wasn't like a huge Peter Gabriel fan. I wasn't like, oh my God, Sledgehammer's an awesome song. And it's almost like he came out at the wrong time for me. Like it wasn't at the right time in my life for his music to really hit me. And it wasn't until like later on, probably maybe later on in high school, maybe early college, when I got like a greatest hits, the 16 greatest golden hits or whatever. And I was just like, that's when I got all like, all the singles from all the other records and stuff. And I was just like, man, it's really good stuff. And like 6 of the 16 tracks from that album are on this album, so yeah, this is like definitely the big one. But I really liked listening to this record this week. I really liked how he really does a great job of melding like the bigger pop songs that are going to be much more radio friendly with kind of the more introspective more artistic songs. Like We Do What We're Told, that reminded me of Bowie. That was like a second side of Low, or like production Bowie, kind of like this weird soundscape kind of a thing that they were doing there. And then the Laurie Anderson song, which was This Is the Picture. I was like, yeah, this is like this artistic Laurie Anderson kind of weird thing. But neither one of them were like this so over the top with the artistic that it's just off-putting. That they're still couched in some sort of more palatable kind of sound.
Yeah.
I love his voice. I think Peter Gabriel, and it really shines on here. The end of Sledgehammer, I like the way that song kind of does like the little soul thing at the end and goes in this different direction. He's kind of like channeling that. Otis Redding. He said that Otis Redding was one of his biggest influences, and he actually one of the guys playing the horns on that song played with Otis Redding. And so he was very much in awe of that guy and what they were doing. So. But the vocals that he does on Don't Give Up, even though he gives Kate Bush like the choruses, when he does that, was it the bridge part? He's just going up really high. It's like a gospel song kind of at that point, and his voice is just fantastic, and it comes out in Red Rain. Like, I love the end of that song where it's just it builds, and then it comes back down again, and him just going Red Rain and kind of over the piano, and then it's just him, and he just has this perfect combination of like really like a really clean, passionate voice, but it's also raspy at the same time. It's just a really great rock voice. I think he's one of my favorites. I would say. So yeah, in your eyes, Josh, I totally see what you're like, or John, I think you're totally right. Like I wasn't even picking up. I was kind of like thinking, where's the world music here? And I knew in my research they talked about this. I think the Senegalese singer Youssou N'Dour, who I guess is like this big artist or singer, and that he's on that song. He's at the end of the song, and that's where the African music comes. I'm like, where is that happening? And it's at the end, right? Yeah. And then after I had that knowledge in my head, after I listened to the song again, I'm like, oh yeah, it is there. It is, and I can see the African, music kind of coming out from that. But you're right. It doesn't beat you over. It's more of a subtle thing because I was so engrossed in like the bulk of that song, and and just thinking of John Cusack holding up the boombox and Say Anything, you know, and that's just knowing that song for so long that like it just kind of, that end part just is like it seamlessly flows into this other direction that I never really even thought of as being quote unquote world music. So I agree with you, John, on that. That was something that I was thinking as well. This is in contrast with Graceland, which was much more in your face with that. This is doing it in a much more subtle way. It's there in Red Rain, and that's actually Stuart Copeland playing. They specifically brought him in to do the hi-hat at the beginning because he wanted it to be done in a certain way, and I guess Stuart Copeland is like one of the best hi-hat drummers that he's like we just want Stuart to come in and just do the beginning whatever he's doing there, so he's playing.
I mean, he is the guy for that hi-hat. I mean, yeah.
So I really like this record. It was great going back to it. I knew most of the songs on here. I thought that voice again, that was probably my favorite of the three that I didn't know as well. But it's just really solid, and he just does a great job of like he's this unassuming guy that's just it's really strange that he became this like huge international star that like would sell out these venues and these huge arenas and stuff, because he's just like he doesn't strike me as like cool. Like he's not a cool rock star guy. He's kind of like just a regular dude that just got creative and did a bunch of just different, at some parts theatrical things, at other parts like experimental musical things. And when you hear him interviewed, he's just like this really low key, very quiet, subdued, calm guy, like a regular dude. But yeah, I love Peter Gabriel, and I love this record. So big thumbs up for me for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. He continued that 2-letter trend on a couple of albums for short words. And I didn't know he did the music for Last Temptation of Christ after this.
Passion.
Yeah.
That came after this. I think he teamed up with Martin Scorsese and did the music for that. So yeah, he got really into, and I guess that takes, I don't know, does anybody have anything else to say? I can just do a quick postscript.
No, it's going to be a high up on my list, I think.
I think it will for me
maybe
too.
In the 20. I don't know. There's been a lot of good albums this decade.
There is. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be harder than the last two, I think. But so yeah, he starts slowing down a couple of years later. I mean, he did did the Passion. I think it's called the Passion, which is the music from Last Temptation of Christ. A couple of years later, I think in the early 90s, he did the next album, which was Us. And that had Digging in the Dirt. That was kind of, and Steam. I think that those were the big singles. And those also had cool videos. Like he continued on that trend of doing those, like that stop animation kind of artistic videos. And he starts to slow down, but he does get really into the humanitarian thing. In addition to the world music, he gets very much into like humanitarian efforts, and participates in these big concerts that are trying to raise money for for various causes, and kind of just hung out there from time to time, putting an album out here and there. He's got 9 total studio albums, so really he only has 4 other studio albums after this. So there's some big gaps in between some of them. I think there was 10 years between Us and Up, and then he did a couple, like one in 2010 and one in 2011, which was the last album that he released. That's called New Blood from 2011. And he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, in 2010 with Genesis, and 2014 as a solo artist. And if you want more Peter Gabriel, I think you might get a new album this year. His 10th album is, I believe, is scheduled to come out later this year, called I/O, lowercase letters.
Huh.
What's that?
Maybe input output, although that's capitalized usually.
I don't know. I don't know. It's just he doesn't care about the title names. It just
Yeah.
maybe just looks good for him. But and I read that there's already been a song that's been released, a single that's been released, and he plans on like incrementally releasing songs from that record. And I read somewhere it's going to be like every blue moon. Like he's basically going to put out another song, so like okay, and maybe by the end of the year the album will be out. So yeah, a new Peter Gabriel album is dropping in 2023. For those of you who are interested.
Interesting. Yeah, he's a. I respect him because he kind of like just does his. I mean, a lot of artists just do their own thing, but he seems kind of singular in a certain way, if that makes sense. But good stuff.
Yeah, and I think an album like this, and actually, he's done a lot of stuff, but I think definitely the royalties from a lot of, because his songs are used in various ways and stuff. So I think he does okay financially.
Yeah. Have you heard any of those other albums after this?
No, I'm mostly familiar with the singles, to be honest, and I did listen to some of them. It definitely seems like, at least with Up, it seemed like he was going. It was more like a soundscape kind of a thing rather than like this seems like a clear attempt to be like poppy and commercial. Whereas I don't know if, and maybe I think with stuff from Us was like that. Up, I listened to like the first half of it. It was kind of more somber soundscape kind of a stuff that he was going for rather than upbeat stuff, but still interesting. Like very creative, interesting guy for sure.
Oh yeah. The single is called Panopticon from this new album coming out in 2023, and there's 3 different mixes you can listen to, at least on Amazon Music, of the song.
Oh, okay.
Inside mix, dark side mix, bright side mix. So
Panopticon.
Trippy. And
what does that mean?
I don't. Well, I've heard it's. I don't know, but I/O is like artistically done. It looks like a little radio tower and then like a CD almost or something for the I/O. Maybe I'll listen to that.
There you go.
Yeah, good stuff.
You know what else you'll be listening to